Okay, so on this slide we talk about the nature of economics as a scientific discipline. Because not everything that claims to be scientific is actually science or scientific. But economics is a science. And so what we need to understand is how do sciences differ from non-sciences. And for example, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, they developed the concept of scientific socialism. But by scientific standards, there was nothing scientific about it, at least not by modern standards. Because what modern science entails was formulated by Sir Raymond Karl Popper, and it was the scientific method can be encapsulated in the following statement: if a theory cannot be falsified, it is not science. So therefore, science and the scientific method is based on hypothesis testing, and a hypothesis is a falsifiable if-then statement. So if I say, for example, if demand goes up, then prices go up. That would be a hypothesis. So I can falsify it because if I observe anywhere that demand goes up and prices do not go up, then I could reject that hypothesis. Or another example would be if I say that students get better grades if they study longer. I can actually observe it and see compare students who study or who spend more time on studying. If I compare those to students who spend less time on studying, I compare the grades. I have a scientific hypothesis, and then I can conclude that, spending more time on studying translates into higher grades. That would then be a scientifically based conclusion. So now we know that science is based on basically hypothesis testing. And so what makes socialism, scientific? And what Marx and Engels equated with scientific was actually dialectic. And dialectic dialectic was already used by the ancient Greek philosophers like Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. And for them, dialectic was, there is a thesis, and then there is an antithesis, and there is a synthesis. And then we basically talk or think through those three concepts of a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. We think through them, and then, after we cannot come up with anything else anymore, and everything feels being said, then the result must be science. So specifically in the case of scientific socialism, the thesis was capital exploits labor. The antithesis was labor will revolt against capital, and the synthesis was, then we need to have socialism. But that has nothing to do with the modern scientific method, because there is no hypothesis. Nothing can be really falsified. Ultimately socialism failed. And at the end of the 1980s, when socialist systems like the Soviet Union collapsed, then we could have said a scientific hypothesis would have been that the collectivization of all the means of production and central planning, if that happens, then these economies will not produce much. That would have been a scientific hypothesis. But just stating capital exploits labor, which is of course already wrong, because many entrepreneurs, they are not exploiting their labor, there are many companies that nurture their workforce and treat them, very respectfully. So this is all made up stuff, essentially. And likewise, the antithesis that labor will revolt against capital, that is something that never happened. And even Engels and Marx, they realized that still at their lifetime, and they got very frustrated when they realized that there was no revolution in England. But nevertheless, their synthesis that socialism might work had a huge appeal to many countries, but there's nothing scientific about it. So there are two things. There is the scientific method, which is based on hypothesis testing and making falsifiable statements, and there is dialectic, where you state a thesis, an antithesis, a synthesis, and you just talk through it. But talking through something, that's not science. That is more philosophy, or that's more the humanities. So we have the humanities, so the concept of dialectic is more at home in the humanities, but economists use the scientific method, which is based on hypothesis testing. So I hope the difference becomes clear, what constitutes science and what not. Science is, as Karl Popper stated, coming up with a theory that can be falsified. And if it cannot be falsified, then it is not science. And the humanities, on the other hand, the non-sciences, they use dialectic. So again, the Marxian so-called scientific socialist theory cannot be tested empirically, and it is therefore more of a humanistic social philosophy rather than a scientific social theory. But modern economics, on the other hand, rests on the hypotheses, or rests on hypotheses that can be tested through either available data or experiments. Okay, so I hope that the difference between the scientific method and non-scientific methods like dialectic is clear. Alright, so let's leave it here for now.